Hi everyone, welcome back to another video on the channel. It's the Enchanted Basin if you're new here. Well, I'm not going to do a whole intro, but today we're going to be talking about dealing with trauma. So let's just, I'll maybe do like a little bit of a trigger warning. It's about medical trauma, so if there's, any experience you've had that, people talking about it themselves, is hard for you, or is triggering for you, please, maybe don't watch this. I don't want to trigger anybody. I just feel like I need to get this out and share it so you guys can kind of understand where my headspace is right now. So, just a bit of a trigger warning. So, I think I wasn't planning on filming this as a whole video for the channel. I was honestly going to do this as a short for Instagram, or not a reel, but just like I'm a stories. That's what it is. I was going to do like a story. And then I was like, I feel like I have more to say than a couple stories will allow. So I thought, let's just do a whole video. Because maybe some of you guys can empathize with this. Or even if you can't, maybe it lets you understand my headspace and where I am right now. Sorry, my hair is greasy. I'm looking at it in the camera and just like, oh girl, you need to take a shower. And yes, I do. I know. But my knees and everything were hurting, and I couldn't manage getting into the shower today. It's going to happen though, I promise. I digress. I guess what triggered this is I'm watching Hoda and Jenna in the morning. I know it's silly, but I enjoy their stuff. There's a lot of laughter and fun, and it's been a really lovely way to start my day during the week. They were doing it, and they had a lady come on and do like a very short, not quite meditation, but like just breathing exercises. And as she was doing it, she was saying some really positive not positive words, but like trying to help you get into this calm headspace. And then she started talking about like, think about what you want for this year, what your word is going to be for this year. And let's focus on bringing that energy into your life. And for me, I think my word is joy. I just really want to have fun this year. Do some fun things myself. Feel like I can, even on days where I'm hurting like today, where Lord, my joints are angry because it's raining, I still want to be able to find joy in it. And I also just want to do more fun things on the channel with you guys. Hopefully less depressing videos like this, but I also want to keep it real. So I'm never gonna, hide any of this, because I know YouTube is covered with perfection a lot of times, and people don't want to show their struggles. And honestly, I'm not afraid to be a little bit vulnerable and do that, because I know I would love to see that in others. But despite that, I still want to be able to have fun and have a lot of joy with you guys. You bring joy to the channel. So that was my word. And as I was saying that, I instantly just started bawling, because last year was not so much full of joy. Sure, there were definitely some great times. Don't get me wrong. I had a lot of really high points, but it was also the first time, like, as an adult, where I've had such scary situations, like between the heart surgery in March and then the procedure again in October. And I know I feel like I harp on these, but they were really scary experiences, and I feel like I need to talk about it, especially the one in March. It was such a life-threatening situation, and then October got to a place where it kind of was, but thankfully they were able to recover before it got really bad. It's the first time I feel like as an adult I've had experienced that. All the rest of my surgeries, the majority, I was like an infant or toddler. I did have one when I was 12, but besides that, all my other procedures as an adult have just been like caths that have gone pretty smooth for the most part. I've had defibrillator, implant that went super smooth, all of that. So both the procedures this year having gone, or just the situations being not smooth, that was a lot of trauma to experience, and to experience it twice in 1 year was a lot. And so when I'm thinking about joy and wanting to really try to attract that energy to myself and bring more of that into my life, it's almost like my subconscious isn't allowing it. Because the instant I think of being happy, not necessarily being happy, of like having fun and joy, my brain just goes to like all of the bad. And I'm not quite sure why. Maybe that's just how dealing with trauma is. There's definitely a period of grief over situations, and then there's a period of how to feel like you can live everyday life having gone through those situations. Like, there's a part of me that's, I'm so grateful. I'm okay. I'm alive. Sure, I could be doing better, but it could also be a lot worse. So I am extremely grateful. I don't want to diminish what I'm feeling, but I also don't want to get sunk into what I'm feeling, if that makes sense. But it's like when I'm trying to focus on finding joy and allowing that for myself. I don't know, my subconscious is just kind of like keeps bringing me back to that position of fear. I'm struggling a little bit to move past it. So I don't I don't know where that leaves me right now. Like, I know I need to find a therapist. I really do. I was in therapy for a really long time and it was great, and then we moved and I haven't found a new one, and COVID happened and that was really hard, and I've struggled to find one because I know I need one specifically for someone who has dealt with chronic illness patients, because that's where so much of my anxiety and depression and PTSD come from. I think that's been my struggle in finding one, is getting overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed very easily by stuff. Like, I snowball things in my head. My goal is to find one, and I know I need it. So if that's one of your suggestions, I feel you. I'm there. I know I need it. I'm hoping to work on that soon. Yeah. Trauma is a crazy thing. I guess I can kind of go into some specifics in case you guys are a little bit out of the blue, or if you're new here and you're not quite sure exactly what I'm talking about. If you're new here, I was born with congenital heart disease, so several different heart defects. My particular defect is pulmonary atresia with ventricular septal defect and multiple aortopulmonary collateral arteries. So essentially, I was born without a pulmonary valve. My pulmonary arteries that go to the lungs, the ones that take the blood from the heart to the lungs, were extremely tiny, like barely there kind of thing. I had a lot of extra arteries coming from my aorta, going to my lungs. So like my blood flow system wasn't quite there. I had a hole in the bottom of my heart. So my heart was essentially just doing extra work. I've had a lot of procedures and surgeries over my life. Majority of them, thankfully, were in, baby, infanthood, toddlerhood. Like I said, I did have another one when I was 12 to do a whole new valve with an open heart. I have had, numerous caths and had a defibrillator implanted due to some arrhythmia issues. But this past year, I was diagnosed with endocarditis at the beginning of March because I had not been feeling well. I actually went to Disney like 2 weeks prior with my parents, and I just remember struggling to keep up. I mean, I know I'm a bit out of shape, so I knew like the walking was going to be a lot, and also having rheumatoid arthritis, doing that much walking, I was kind of prepared to like need to take it slower or just maybe struggle a little. But there was times where, like you get there right at opening and you want to run to the first ride and all this. And I remember like I would run like 3 seconds. I've never really been able to run anyway, but I would get so out of breath, like painfully out of breath. And then I had been having a lot of issues with chills, like extremely deep chills. And I was like, I had them even before the trip. I'd had, this for several weeks, if not, maybe a month and a half. And I was thinking, it's just the cold. Like, I don't deal with the cold very well anyway, but my hands were parts of them were going kind of like bluish. But I was like, well, also my circulation isn't great. So it's because there's so much background of cardiac and just medical issues, it's hard for me to know when it's just my norm or when this is a problem. I now know that such deep chills every day, like I was to the point where like in the evening, when it was almost every evening about time to like cook dinner, I'd have to go sit on the couch, wrap in like 3 blankets, and I would just be shivering so much, like painful. And once we were on the Disney trip, I was still having those. I was in Florida. Granted, it was in February, but it was not cold. Like people were out in t-shirts and shorts, and I had to get like I had to buy a hoodie when I went there because I was not prepared for that. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it's so cold. My parents were like, oh yeah, I guess it's chilly. But I was like freezing. And it became apparent that this is not, something's off. No one else around me is like freezing like this. And then at nights I started having crazy sweats, like just sweating through my clothes. And I thought it's because I had gotten a little bit of sun. I was like, maybe it's the sunburn. I'm just, burning through it or whatever. It turns out it was endocarditis. So I went to the hospital, the ER, at the end of March, or the end of February. I think actually it was like March 1st. And then they ended up transferring me to the Children's Hospital, which is where my cardiologist is located, because they do like a congenital heart clinic. There's an adult portion in the Children's Hospital, just because it's how it works here. It is an approved adult congenital heart clinic. They transferred me there, and they pretty quickly were thinking I had endocarditis, that or a clot, because my CT scan was showing I potentially had a clot. There's a whole lot that went on. If you want to see my specific surgery journey, I have a video. I will link it down in the description. I'm not going to go into everything about the recovery and all that, but it was rough, just like going from not feeling well to like, oh, let's put you on antibiotics, to like, let's get you a PICC line. I had like a PICC line inserted, had to go home with it on IV antibiotics, and then 2 days later spiked another fever. It came back, and it was like within 2 days I was having open heart surgery. So it was fairly emergent kind of situation. It was just a lot to deal with. I think they said thankfully the surgery went pretty well. Like it was like 12-hour surgery. I was out for a really long time. But just dealing with that situation in general, that was a lot, because, none of this planned. A lot of times with congenital heart stuff, surgeries, usually they know stuff's going to happen and you can plan for needing a valve repair or replacement. And so you can prepare for open heart surgery, but mine was like, here's 2 days. But I knew I needed it. I mean, it was basically like life or death. My valve was deteriorating, and like, that's not good. Recovered from all of that, did okay in the summer, and then during the surgery, they were able to balloon my valve, but my pulmonary arteries on either side were still narrowed quite a bit, and so there was a lot of pressure building up in my heart, and so we knew we needed to do another procedure, which is what October's was. I don't know if I really went into what all happened in October or what that procedure was for, but we were going to be ballooning my left and right pulmonary arteries, potentially stenting them if they felt like it needed it. When they went in there and they tested the pressures, everything was, high, is kind of what they expected. And then they were like, okay, so let's go in and let's balloon it. And as they were able to balloon it a little bit. And then they were like, okay, we need to balloon it a bit more. As they ballooned a bit more, thankfully for all this, I was asleep. We already planned I was going to be under general anesthesia. So thankfully I was not awake, because sometimes for CAFs they can put you awake, but if they're going to do any sort of intervention, they usually put you under general anesthesia. So thankfully I was not awake during any of this. But when they went to try and balloon it more, the balloon on the little catheter tip burst. Thankfully it all stayed together as one piece. So it wasn't like little pieces they had to go find. But then the balloon came off the catheter, and it was just going between each of my arteries, and they were trying to make sure it didn't go to my lungs. So what a procedure that normally would take like an hour and a half ended up taking, I think, 4 or 5, because they had to, I don't even know how they did it. They were able to use contrast and then find the balloon, but they kept they would sometimes hold on to it and then it would go away from them. It took them like 4 hours to retrieve the balloon. And I remember they even came and apparently talked to Craig and were like, here's the situation we're in. We're doing our best to try and retrieve it. Because if that goes to the lungs, that can cause major issues in the struggle with blood flow and breathing and all of that. It essentially acts as like a clot, which is not good. So they talked to Craig and was, here's where we are. There was always the option, Craig was like, do we have to do open heart to retrieve it? And they're like, that is a possibility, but we're going to try not to. Thankfully, they didn't. They were able to retrieve it. But, it was a lot more anesthesia than my body was ready for. I had a very, very rough time coming out of anesthesia. I don't do well with anesthesia, so there's a specific formula we follow every single time, and I usually do okay. If we have to veer from that for any reason, which they did this time because they had to keep me under way longer than we had planned for, so they were probably pumping me full of anesthesia, and I had a lot of vomiting afterwards, like waking up but I had to stay flat because I still had the incision on, it was right by femoral artery. So like right at between your pelvis and like where your leg meet, right there in that little crease. That's where they do the insertion of it. And so I still had the stitches there. And so you have to lay flat usually 4 or 5 hours or so after a cast just to make sure everything is stable and it's not going to open up. Well, because of all the throwing up, I was like moving and it was a lot of pressure. My stitches burst open, and this might be a little graphic, so TMI, I'm sorry. Apparently blood was just like squirting out, so they had to have someone come and like really push down insanely hard, and I was awake for that, and it was so painful. Like, it literally felt like they were just punching me there. But I knew they needed to. I was super aware of what all was happening other than knowing that I was throwing up and someone was basically fisting my leg. And then they had to come and like put in new stitches right there and keep hold of it. And then I still had, again, more issues with nausea after it. It took a really long time. And I missed a couple doses of my meds because I was so nauseous I couldn't keep anything down. We couldn't take a couple of my meds, my Lyrica and my nortriptyline, and I don't think you can usually do those by IV. They have to be oral, from my understanding at least. But because I missed those are the kind of meds where you don't want to miss doses. If you do, you can have withdrawal symptoms. So I was dealing with withdrawal in addition to just anesthesia coming down from it. And then the next day they were very worried. They're like, you're extremely pale. And they ended up talking to a hematologist, and my blood numbers were very low. And they were like, well, you lost a lot of blood both during the procedure and after it. So they ended up giving me a transfusion, which the first time I had ever had that done. I was really nervous because they were like, sometimes this can make people nauseous. And I was like, great. Because I'm already dealing with nausea. I was just like, delightful. This is great. But they're like, it should help you feel better. Because the reason I was probably so nauseous was because I had so little blood, and not only the anesthesia, but like the blood loss can cause a lot of nausea too. I think that I did okay with the transfusion, but that was a scary recovery, especially having mentally gone into it thinking, okay, I'm going to have just a one-night stay. It's going to be fairly routine. This should be okay. I've had the surgeon before. He's amazing. And this was absolutely no fault of him or the clinic. Honestly, I'm grateful they were able to retrieve the balloon and do everything without open heart. I don't know a lot of clinics would have been able to do that. And so I'm very grateful. I'm not at all, putting anything on them. This was just apparently this kind of thing happens extremely rare. So for the balloon to burst is very rare. And then for it to come off the catheter is like never happens kind of thing. So they're obviously going to be sending information to whoever makes that equipment and be like, hey, we need to figure out what's going on so this doesn't happen to anybody else. So it was nothing that they did wrong, but it was just a very hard recovery. And I think that one is what has brought up more trauma for me than even the open heart, which is weird because the open heart was so hard. That was a month-long stay. I lost my voice. I mean, open heart is a lot. But this one, I ended up staying, I think 2 days. I only had to stay one extra night, thankfully. But I think because mentally I was prepared for it to be so simple, and it really wasn't, that is what has caused the trauma for me. And now I'm just like, I have another procedure scheduled for the end of this month. It's a little bit different. They're going to do an electrophysiology test to test rhythms. Because they had to take my defibrillator out. When I had the endocarditis, one of the leads got infected. So they took it out. So, I mean, still got my scar. But they had to take it out. And they were like, well, you haven't been having any rhythms like for years. So we feel confident to be able to take it out for a while now. And then we'll retest you. And so that's what we're doing. We were planning to do it in October, but because of all of the complications, the EP surgeon was like, I'm not doing it. Let's get you recovered, come back in a few months, and then we'll do it. So we're doing it at the end of January. And I'm trying to be really calm about it because he's such an amazing surgeon. He does the last procedures I've had, actually both of them have been so well. Like, he's done such a great job, and I know he's very capable of this. So it's not like I'm worried about their ability to do this. It's more just in my head now, like, oh, this simple procedure, but what could go wrong? You know, that's where I am with things. I'm really hopeful that it goes well and they don't find any weird rhythms anymore, and I won't even have to have any sort of defibrillator. But I have been having some issues since the procedure in October, and my EKGs now are showing a different rhythm that I've never had. So they're wondering if there was a little bit of trauma to like the electrical part of the heart that's causing that. I mean, I've been okay. I've not been passing out or having anything too intense, but it's still a rhythm that you have to really monitor. And it's common. It's called right bundle branch block. I think I've talked about this before. It's fairly common in people with my defect to have, like, from a very young age. So, like, I was looking, there's a Facebook group I'm in of women with, you know, congenital heart disease. And I was looking it up, and like so many people with my defect have it, but it's because they've had it since they were younger. It's not as common for someone to not have it and then for it to start happening. That's when they get concerned. Typically, in like a person without congenital heart disease, if you start getting this kind of rhythm, they put in a pacemaker. So I'm just like, I'm really hopeful they don't find that. Or, I mean, if they do what they gotta do, I guess I just want to, like, I'm just ready to feel a bit more stable and to feel like I can kind of move on from things. I think maybe that's what's also holding me back is this upcoming procedure and not knowing how things are going to go. So I think that's why I'm holding on to the anxiety, honestly. Now that I'm talking through it, that's probably why I'm not allowing myself to find joy, is because I'm still so scared of what's going to happen. Interesting. Look, I figured it out myself. Who needs a therapist? Honestly, I do. I know I do. That's where I am with things. So I'm really trying to work on finding creative and fun things to do this year. But I think my brain is just kind of holding me back and hasn't gotten past all of the trauma of the last year. And then with COVID, and my RA is a whole other thing with the new meds and stuff. I don't even want to get to that. My word for this year is going to be joy. It's going to happen. I just have to find ways to work through this. I don't want to just like move past it and act like it didn't happen, because I do need to not embrace it, but I do need to recognize that it happened and work through it and process it and maybe allow myself to process it. So that's kind of where we are. Anyway, if you guys have been through trauma or that kind of thing, especially medical trauma, you are welcome to share your story in the comments, but don't feel like you have to. I just want to tell you, my heart goes out to you, because maybe even though we may have different situations we've gone through, it's there. And I think we can kind of all connect on that situation. And even if you haven't been through it, we'll just leave some happy thoughts. I don't know how much I'm going to post in January, to be honest. I feel like I need a little bit of a mental break. The holidays, we didn't get to go home for Christmas because of the winter storm. Everything got really bad here, and we couldn't even really leave the house. We were supposed to drive down to Tennessee, so we're going to be doing that in January and having like our Christmas in the middle of January. So I think I might just take a few weeks after posting this and get my head in order and prepare for the procedure. And hopefully after that, I'll just feel a little bit more light and lifted and prepared and excited to move forward. But I think until I get through that, I'm just going to have a really hard time focusing. So I'm sorry if there's going to be a little bit less, content, but that's just kind of where I am right now. I love you guys. I really hope everyone had a lovely holiday and a happy new year. And I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're excited for this year. If you have a word for this year, comment it down below. I would love to know what it is. I think we can all kind of bounce joy and inspiration off each other and find ways to really have a good time this year. I think that's what we all need. No matter what we're going through, we got to find a way to have a good time and spark and bring joy to it. So that's where I am. All right. I love you guys. I hope you're doing well. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll be seeing you guys in a few weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.